On a frigid February night in 2013, a young woman vanished after a simple dinner date with her husband. Her name was Kira Sager Trevino. She was only 30 years old, bright, warm, ambitious, and just beginning to carve out a life she loved. She worked as a store manager at Delia's in the Mall of America, and she had a close circle of friends and coworkers who adored her. But behind the surface of her marriage, there were fractures. Kira's relationship with her husband, Jeffrey Trevino, was unraveling, strained by lies, infidelity, and secrets. By the time police were called, it was too late. There would be no missing persons mystery dragging on for years. Within days, investigators were convinced they knew what had happened. And when the truth came out in court, it revealed a story of betrayal and violence that stunned Minnesota. Kira and Jeffrey Trevino lived in a modest rambler on St. Paul's east side, the kind of house that blended in, one you might pass 100 times without a second thought. To neighbors, they looked like any other couple in their early 30s, building a quiet life together. But behind closed doors, the picture wasn't as tidy. Kira had been restless. Friends would later recall how she confided to them that she was unhappy, that she had thought about leaving Jeffrey for good. Still, on the night of Friday, February 22nd, 2013, things looked ordinary enough. The two went out to dinner together. They wandered the sprawling corridors of the Mall of America. For Kira, the mall was familiar ground. She spent her work days managing Delia's, a teen fashion store where the racks overflowed with neon colors and pop music pulsed endlessly. Their outing wasn't unusual. It wasn't tense. Nothing about it, at least to anyone watching, suggested that this would be the last night Kira Trevino would ever be seen alive. The next morning, Saturday, the first cracks in that ordinary facade began to show. Kira never arrived for her shift at Delia's. To some people, skipping a shift might not raise immediate alarms. But to those who knew her, it was unthinkable. Kira was reliable, the kind of manager who always showed up, always answered her phone, always texted back. But that morning, her phone sat silent. Calls rolled to voicemail. Texts were left undelivered. By midday, her coworkers began exchanging worried glances. By evening, worry hardened into dread. Hours slipped by, and still no word from Kira. On Sunday, when she missed yet another shift, her absence could no longer be brushed off as a fluke. That's when police were finally called. And once they stepped inside the Trevino home, what they found would turn a simple missing person report into one of St. Paul's most haunting murder cases. It didn't take long for investigators to realize something was terribly wrong. When officers stepped into Kira and Jeffrey's Eastside home, the air was thick with unease. On the surface, it looked ordinary enough. A modest house with groceries on the counter, laundry folded on the sofa, little signs of everyday life left in motion. But then the details started to emerge. Small droplets of blood marked the hardwood floor. Faint smears traced along the wall near the hallway. And in certain rooms, the sharp, unmistakable sting of bleach lingered in the air. Someone had been scrubbing, but not well enough. It wasn't cleaning, it was covering up. Jeffrey Trevino told police that after their night out, Kira had left him. He said she stormed off in anger, maybe staying with a friend. He insisted there was nothing more to it, but detectives quickly realized his story had gaps. Too many gaps. The first step was to retrace her movements. Footage from Mall of America confirmed Jeffrey's account, at least in part. The couple had been there Friday night, leaving together just before closing. Meanwhile, her absence was setting off alarm bells with the people who knew her best. Co-workers told police that Kira was dependable, the kind of person who didn't just vanish from work. Friends confirmed she hadn't reached out, not even with a quick message. Her parents hadn't heard from her either. For someone as rooted in routine as Kira, her silence was unthinkable. Police started canvassing the neighborhood. They knocked on doors, asking if anyone had seen Kara that weekend. Some neighbors remembered hearing voices, maybe an argument, but nothing conclusive. Others mentioned seeing Jeffrey's car come and go at odd hours. Still, there was no sign of Kira herself. It was as if she had been swallowed up between Friday night and Saturday morning. Days passed, and unease only grew. Each hour without a trace of her chipped away at the hope that she had simply walked away. This wasn't a cooling off period. This wasn't a missing person case that ended with a tearful reunion. Something violent had happened, and then came the first major break. Kira's car, a white Pontiac G6, was discovered abandoned in a parking lot not far from the mall. At first glance, the vehicle looked untouched, but when investigators opened up the doors, the truth was undeniable. Blood stains marked the interior. Cleanup attempts were obvious. The surfaces wiped, smears half erased. Whoever parked that car hadn't just left it behind. They had tried to erase Kira inside it. By then, police weren't asking if a crime had been committed. The only question left was who had committed it, and all the evidence, no matter how carefully scrubbed, was beginning to circle back to Jeffrey Trevino. As detectives dug deeper, Jeffrey's calm exterior began to crack. At first, he spoke evenly, offering rehearsed explanations for Kira's absence, but under questioning, the mask slipped. He admitted what others already knew. Their marriage was strained. Kira had grown distant. She had even been seeing another man. Still, Jeffrey insisted he hadn't harmed her. He claimed he was the wronged husband, left behind when she walked away. But the evidence told a different story. Forensic testing confirmed what investigators feared. The blood scattered through the home belonged to Kira. Tiny droplets in the bathroom, smears in the hallway, and then the most damning discovery: a section of carpet pulled back, revealing flooring beneath that was still soaked with her blood. The surface had been cleaned, but not well enough to erase what happened there. While detectives built their case inside the house, the outside world was mobilizing. The Twin Cities rallied for Kira. Volunteers blanketed neighborhoods, searching along roadsides, wooded trails, and frozen bends of the Mississippi. Flyers with her picture, a smiling brunette with kind eyes, were taped to every lamppost and bulletin board. Local media covered every update, her story dominating headlines and nightly news. For a time, it seemed the entire city was holding its breath, waiting for answers. But Jeffrey Trevino didn't join them. While strangers braved the cold to search for his wife, he stayed away. He didn't walk with the volunteers. He didn't stand before cameras to plead for her safe return. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. To those who watched him closely, it seemed as though he already knew she wasn't coming home. By early March, the case against Jeffrey Trevino had shifted from troubling to undeniable. Prosecutors know that without a body, a murder trial is one of the hardest to win. Juries want certainty. They want to see what happened. Without that, defense attorneys can argue endlessly that the victim is alive somewhere, that they chose to disappear. Even so, the evidence was mounting too quickly to ignore. Detectives also noted Jeffrey's behavior. The lack of emotion, the refusal to join searches, the way he spoke about Kira in past tense as though he already knew she would never be found alive. On March 5th, 2013, less than 2 weeks after Kira's disappearance, prosecutors charged Jeffrey Trevino with 2 counts of second-degree murder. It was a bold move, given the body was still missing, but investigators were confident. For Kira's family and the hundreds of volunteers who had spent days combing through the Twin Cities, the charges were a double-edged moment. Relief that someone was being held accountable, but devastation that it all confirmed their worst fear. They weren't looking for a woman anymore. They were searching for her remains. By early May, nearly 11 weeks had passed since Kira vanished. The official searches had quieted, but the Mississippi still carried whispers of her name. Locals knew that when the ice broke and the river swelled, it sometimes gave up secrets. On the morning of May 8th, 2013, a man walking near the river in St. Paul noticed something. Something caught along the brush at the water's edge. At first, he thought it was debris, a log maybe, tangled in spring runoff. But as he drew closer, a shape began to take form. Clothing, hair, a pale arm, twisted unnaturally in the current. The man froze. The silence of the river pressed in, only by the rush of water. And then, with a trembling hand, he dialed 911. When officers arrived, they immediately secured the area. Even hardened investigators felt the weight of what they were seeing. The body of a woman, badly decomposed from weeks in the water, lay tangled in the branches. Recovery teams moved carefully, documenting every angle, every detail, before bringing her to shore. Back at the medical examiner's office, the confirmation came quickly. Dental records and personal identifiers left no doubt. The woman in the river was 30-year-old Kira Steger Trevino. News spread across the Twin Cities in hours. Volunteers who had searched in the bitter cold wept. Flyers that once asked, "Have you seen Kira?" now stood as memorials. For her family, the confirmation brought both devastation and a grim kind of relief. Their worst fears were real, but at least now there was no more waiting, no more wondering. They could finally bring her home. And for prosecutors, the discovery meant their case against Jeffrey Torino was no longer rested on circumstantial bloodstains and missing person suspicion. They now had the most definitive evidence of all, Kira herself. When Kira's body was recovered, prosecutors finally had the confirmation they needed. The trial of Jeffrey Trevino opened that fall, drawing heavy attention from the media and community alike. Every seat in the Ramsey County courtroom seemed filled, reporters with notepads, neighbors curious and unsettled, and Kira's family who endured each day of testimony with quiet grief. The prosecution's case was clear. Kira hadn't run away. She had been killed inside her own home. They relied on forensic experts to explain how much blood was found and why it was consistent with fatal injuries. They leaned on the recovery of her body to close the gap the defense once tried to exploit. Proof that Kira was, without question, dead. The defense tried to cast doubt, suggesting the evidence was circumstantial, that no one had witnessed Jeffrey commit violence, that perhaps her death was the result of something other than murder. But their arguments fell flat against the mountain of facts. When the verdict was read, guilty of unintentional second-degree murder, the courtroom was silent except for the muffled sobs of Kira's loved ones. Jeffrey Trevino was sentenced to 27 years in prison. For the public, the outcome brought closure to a story that had hung heavy over the Twin Cities for months. For Kira's family, it was justice, though not the kind anyone had wanted. They set out to find her. They had succeeded. But what they brought home was not their daughter, their friend, their coworker, only the truth of what happened to her.